Direction point! Direction point!
A Doctor Who podcast network.
Well, hi everybody. Welcome back to Doctor Who Literature, the podcast taking you through the world of the Doctor Who novelizations put out by Target Books from 1973 onward in publication order. We're a member of the Direction Point Doctor Who podcast network. My name is Jason, and I'm your host on this journey, this very long journey. This week, we are covering book 78, which means we are technically at the halfway point of this podcast. The original Target run concluded with book number 156, and this is book 78, Earthshock by Ian Marter. We are halfway home. Now, in another sense, we are not close to halfway home because there are many non-numbered Target books coming up. The Season 23 Missing Stories, the Companions of Doctor Who books, Slipback, and then, of course, the 21st century Target imprint Doctor Who novelizations of both the new series and the Douglas Adams 1970s stories, and the new interpretations of Target novelizations that were previously written by Terrance Dicks. For example, we have the David Fisher Androids of Tara and Stones of Blood manuscripts in the 21st century. We also have the forthcoming Steve Gallagher original version of Warrior's Gate, not the same as the John Lydecker version that we already covered earlier in this podcast. So we're halfway home by number, but we are not halfway through by book volume. I want to thank everybody who has been along on the ride with me, and tell your friends. I'm Jason Miller. This is the Doctor Who Literature podcast. Well, no, don't tell your friends I'm Jason Miller. That's my name. That would be weird, but tell your friends to join the show. We have an email this week, and this is from our good friend Stephen B. from the New to Who podcast. Stephen joined me some time ago for the Tomb of the Cybermen episode, and he is coming up again in the not-too-distant future for a newer novelization. He writes, "Hello, my friend. I have just finished listening to your Fort of Doomsday DWL episode and loved it. Your textual analysis at the end was particularly sharp and insightful. Thank you for your amazing work." Stephen had joined us back in episode 41, and you'll hear him before too much longer. Stephen, thank you so much for the email. Really appreciate hearing from you, my friend. You can email me at Doctor Who Literature, that's drwholiterature@gmail.com. I love receiving emails, and if I like it, I will read it out on the show. And if I don't like it, I may read it out on the show anyway. Speaking of which, friend of the program and now producer, Jim Sangster, who has provided many of our musical parodies and our new logo, has a new t-shirt out for those of you who are quote-unquote pro-Meglos Twitter trolls. That was a phrase I used on the podcast last week. Fraser Gregory enjoyed the phrase, and now Jim Sangster has made it available in t-shirt format. That's on Jim's excellent Redbubble store, which already provides a significant portion of my t-shirt wardrobe, and I will put a link to that in the show notes. Jim, thank you so much for your contributions to the program, and I guess thanks to Fraser as well. Fraser will be here. Always looking forward to hearing what he has to say about certain books. And if you've been listening to the back and forth between Fraser and me, you probably know exactly which book he is covering next. I have many other exciting guest appearances scheduled over the next couple of months. I am not going to jinx it because I don't have recording dates for most of these people yet, but I'm very excited about the quality of the guests that I'm going to be bringing to you, several authors and other notables from the extended Doctor Who universe. I'm very, very happy to have this week another in my growing stable of Black Archives authors. I love having the Black Archives guys as guests on the show. I've been hoping to get Jon Arnold for quite some time, and I finally had an opening this week. And Jon is joining me to discuss Earthshock, the TV story, and the novelization by Ian Marter, and of course many other topics from the worlds of Doctor Who and beyond. So, let's get to it.
Hello, fellow time travelers, and welcome to the Doctor Who Target Book Club podcast, the only podcast to discuss, in story order, all the Doctor Who novelizations. My name is Tony Whitt, and every 2 weeks or so, I'm joined by a 2 to 3 person discussion panel, including our so-called expert who's been a Who fan since 1979. That would be me. We also get the views of intermediate, casual, and novice fans who either have never seen the show or who have never read these books until these podcasts, including
Dalton Hughes
and
Allison Fitz-Seyfried.
You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you find good podcasts, or even ones like ours. You're listening to the Doctor Who Literature Podcast. Enjoy your travels.
So I was trying to write a biography for my next guest, but as often happens on this program, if I were to do a full biography, that would take about 45 minutes, and these conversations generally only go for about an hour, which would not leave us much time to discuss the book of the week, let alone play 20 questions. So, Jon Arnold, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to join the ranks of the ghastly woke zombies.
And the pro-Meglos Twitter trolls, or are you anti-Meglos like all good-hearted people?
I don't mind Meglos. It's fun. It's not a great story by any means. But, I grew up on the Cactus Tom Baker as one of the great images of the story I just missed before I started watching properly.
I loved Meglos when I was 11 and 12. The story has not aged along with my tastes, but it is enjoyable in a guilty pleasure sort of way. That's my current take on it.
That's entirely my take on it. It was mentioned, I think there's a podcast called Comfort Blanket, and they discussed it. And they said the trick is on all those stories that you don't like now, it's to watch it when it was 12. It's like when Peter Capaldi talks about the Web Planet. He says when you were that age, when you were a child, it was this wonderful thing. It was awesome. It was, ants and giant ants and moths fighting on this alien planet, and it looked wonderful. And then you see it when you've got the adult critical facilities, and, maybe it's not quite what you thought it was back then.
Yeah, I had that experience. When I first watched Margarine Undead, I thought that the spaceship explosion at the very end was the equal of the Death Star explosion in the original Star Wars. Then, when Margarine Undead comes out on DVD 25 years later, I watched the original effect. Come to find out, it did not age quite as well as the destruction of the Death Star.
I think Matt Irvin and company would be delighted that they fooled you for 10 minutes back in the 80s.
Watching on a low-resolution 19-inch monitor with rabbit ears, but yes.
I think it's kind of, it's that old low quality of the televisions we had back then, isn't it? That's what helps a lot of the time. It's made with that in mind almost.
I watch a lot of old sporting events from my childhood in the 70s and 80s, mostly old Mets games and old World Series games that are all on YouTube. But those have been completely unrestored. So you're watching half-inch videotape from 1977 to 1984, for example.
Oh yeah.
And there's dropouts and there's audio trouble, and they just release it as is with no effort at cleaning it up for the home audience. Whereas if you were to watch something like Sontaran Experiment, which is shot on the same sports quality videotape in 1974, even though Sontaran Experiment is not Philip Hinchcliffe era's finest hour, when you watch it now and it's been restored, it looks like it was shot yesterday. That's how good the picture quality is on the Blu-rays.
Oh, it's astonishing. Yeah, particularly those film restorations and what they can work on, the actual videos, which weren't designed to work like that in the first place. You watch it, you go, did it ever really look this good? Even when I was a child, to those eyes? I don't think it ever did, really.
Yeah, so that's one place where Doctor Who fans are lucky. We get the best people restoring these videos to the best quality, so we watch them in a way they were never meant to be seen, in high def.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it shows up, particularly the 60s, when they're using backdrops, which were quite clever. You were talking tiny screens. What was it? 6, 8-inch screens.
Right, 405 line broadcast quality.
Yeah. So, we're never watching them as they're meant to be watching them with love, but it's kind of strange. Sometimes I like going, as a child of the pirate video era, we kindly had Australian and American friends sending over videotapes to us. It was just wonderful to be able to see them, and it was kind of part of the magic was just that smudgy, awful quality. Because we're Doctor Who fans. We've never watched it for the quality of the special effects or the scenery, have we? which can often be brilliant, particularly with the limitations. But you're watching it for the story, for the performances, not necessarily the detail on the pictures.
I was visiting John Blum before he became a Doctor Who author. This is when he was living a few towns over from me. We were both in college, and he was doing his big fan video, Time Rift. And I was at his parents' house at the end of a day of shooting, and I noticed that he happened to have a VHS cassette marked The 10th Planet, which at that point was not commercially available, and I didn't know that you could watch episodes 1, 2, and 3. So I begged and pleaded and made puppy eyes, and he gave me the VHS cassette, The 10th Planet. I returned it a couple of months later, and you're watching it. It is nth generation. It is so blurry as to be almost unintelligible. But as a Doctor Who fan, the thrill of watching parts 1, 2, and 3 of 10th Planet outweighs the fact that you can barely understand the dialogue or make out the actors' faces. And then it was the same when I got my nth generation copy of Underwater Menace Part 3 later that same year. Could barely make it out, couldn't hear it, but all you needed to hear was the cliffhanger line, "Nothing in the world can stop me now," and that's all you needed, and it was wonderful.
Yeah. You're there for the moment, aren't you? It's magnificent.
Nothing in the world can stop me now!
So, John, I want to give you your due. We have a lot to talk about, of course, with Black Archives and fanzines and such, but what are the things that you've done in the Doctor Who world that you are the most proud of?
It would probably be the Black Archives. Pure, and I think it was the first book I wrote was Rose, and it was chosen as the launch title, and that was purely accidental because the first batch of 4 authors, my name came first in the alphabet, which was Phil Purser-Hallard was editing it, and he just purely put it in without thinking as 1, 2, 3, and 4. So it was me, Jim Curry-Smith, Liz Miles, and him, and he quite modestly put his book last. Where I went, "You should have put it first." And he went, "Oh yeah, actually, I probably should have done that, shouldn't I?" But, yeah,
it's like with Target. When Target renumbered their first 74 books, they renumber them in alphabetical order. So you get the Abominable Snowman treatment.
Yes, and I am one of the very, very few, I think, who actually kept their targets in library order for no good reason. Again, I was talking to Jim Curry-Smith. He went, "You're mad. Why are you doing that?" So it's just always the way I've done it. It's maybe it's the way my brain works. If there's numbers on there, I want them in order.
It poses an interesting dilemma for me because going forward, I've finally reached the era where the books come out in numerical order. So this is book 77. Next week is book 78, or I should say, this is book 78. Next week is book 79. But Kinda and Snake Dance were released out of order. So Kinda, book 84, is released before Snake Dance, book 83. Do I cover them in this podcast in publication order? Do I switch to number order? And then I'll have an even bigger dilemma because there are 2 book 127s. And then Vengeance on Varos, book 106, comes out 2 years after everything else in its number range. So
yeah, I was about to say
interesting struggles there.
Oh, you never thought this when you started the podcast, did you? How's this going to work?
So how many Black Archives have you done now?
I have written 4 now. Rose, Scream the Shalka, The 11th Hour, and Invasion of the Dinosaurs was 2020, I think it was.
So you've covered the whole gamut. You've done the new series, you've done the Wilderness Years, and now you've done the classic series.
Oh yeah, and the Wilderness Years was very, very deliberate. When I went for Rose, that kind of touched on the Wilderness Years because I think you have to do that particularly with the way Russell, obviously worked on the range in the Wilderness Years, and the things he picks up on were important to me to get through. So I really wanted to sort of something that would dive into the Wilderness Years a bit, and Scream the Shark was obviously the perfect thing, particularly with Paul Cornell being probably the key creative influence with Revelation. I remember reading that absolutely blew my mind. I was supposed to be revising for mock exams when that came out. I didn't do any revision. I just ran through Revelation in an evening. It's not that long a book, but oh my God, the things it did with Doctor Who, it might not look so radical now because of all, like anything that's innovative, all those innovations get kind of familiarized by people who've taken that and run with it. But I can still run with it, and I still get the feeling I had when I was 17 and reading that. It's just, it's such a, one of those. It's like the Three Doctors being my first Target book. I go back to it, and you can engage your critical brain, and that's fine, and I can do that. But I'd rather not. I just like to go back and have them as this kind of moment in my life, and I think to a lot of it, that's what Target books are for us, aren't they? And the New Adventures and all the other Doctor Who novels of the Wilderness years. It's just a perfect sort of just to remind that time of life. It's like I say, you don't measure your life in coffee spoons; you measure it in Target books.
I've mentioned this on the podcast, but I got into the Target books when I was 11. I go to college at 17 going on 18, at exactly the moment the New Adventures came out. So I discovered the New Adventures and Rekart's Doctor Who, which was my first real brush with organized fandom, all my first year away at college. And when distribution was spotty in the States, so it was years before I actually got a copy of Time Worm Revelation. So my first Paul Cornell book was Love and War,
Oh wow!
which hit Rec Arts like a thermonuclear detonation in the autumn of 1982. There was a large cadre of posters whose signature files were all four words: read, love, and war.
Oh wow!
So I read most of that in one night, the night before my sister's bat mitzvah. So I was basically half awake for the most important day of her life because I was staying up late trying to get to the moment in Love and War when Ace has her assignation with Jan, which was the first moment that the New Adventures went there. They would, of course, go there many more times in the years to come. But the writing and the plotting and the impact of Love and War kind of rewired my brain so that for me, the New Adventures were the forefront of Doctor Who for most of the 1990s. And I'm probably not going to cover them on this show because there's many other podcasts doing the New Adventures very well. But I will always talk about the impact they had on me. At the moment that I discovered organized fandom, the NAs were ongoing Doctor Who. So I have just tremendous loyalty to them, even now, 30 plus years later.
Oh, me and you both, yeah. And I think Love and War is actually the better book than Revelation. Revelation is a young writer wanting to make all that impact up front. Love and War is him starting to kind of realize that talent to a large degree. It works as a proper Doctor Who story in novel form as well, and it still managed to do a lot of radical things and have a ton of fun. With cameos for the likes of Vic Reeves, the old British comedian.
And of course, the usual fandom name checks. But yeah,
Yes.
Love and War is not experimental the way that Revelation was, but you could
No.
tell it as a four-part story. But even within the bounds of a four-part story directed by Chris Clough on location, it does incredible things within the structure of that four-part story. And the ending is just, even though Ace came back, several books later, older, wiser, and tougher, quote unquote, the impact of her leaving is like very little that you saw in the classic series, with the possible exception, I guess, of this week's book.
Yes. Brutal endings. Perfect theme there.
But just to jump back to the Black Archives for a moment, what's the extent of your ongoing involvement with The Line? Because you are obviously one of its more prolific writers.
It's a case of I've been writing a bit less since the pandemic. I think it's just been my mental space has been a little less, but I'm kind of talking to a few people, and a few ideas come up. So I've got a couple of pictures in mind. I know that they've commissioned a good few years ahead at the minute. I think 3 or 4 years almost. But I've still got a few ideas, and I'm still going to go back to them. And I know it's an open line with likes of Phil and Stu at the Black Archive, and Paul Driscoll, of course, as well, who's a
Yes.
fantastic editor as well. I'm not writing anything at the moment, but I'm editing, and I'm overdoing it. I think Silver Archive for their other range on Buffy, the second season of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which is fun when Joss Whedon's all the revelations about him come out. So you've got to redo all whole chapters about based on all the revelations we now know. But it's all good fun.
I had started watching Buffy in the States because it came out my second year of law school. And I didn't watch the pilot, but I watched the first full episode, The Witch. And I watched most of the first season. And then I missed the season 2 premiere. But by the time you get to School Hard, which is season 2, episode 3, that's when the line really finds its voice. And then Surprise/Innocence, which aired in the early months of 1998. I watched that back about 15 years later. It lands like shrapnel. It is so good, even more than 2 decades later. So yeah, Buffy season 2, definitely right up there.
Yeah, I think to give away part of what's in the book. I think the important point is that's where they get a female voice in the writers' room as well. So it is more kind of empathetic feeling towards Buffy. You've got the feeling, Buffy's feelings. They don't quite tap that, I think, in that first season and a half. It's don't get me wrong, it's still great TV because again, I think School Hard and Halloween that was kind of the point I jumped on
Oh
because
yes,
I'd
yes, Halloween.
seen bits and pieces of it, and I hadn't quite sort of collected. It's been one of the things. I'll watch the odd episode, but I think School Hard, that's great. Come back, Halloween, right? I'm all in on this, and I was there right till the end at that point, and catching it pretty damn quickly on it.
Yeah, I think it was Marty Noxon who came on board. Yeah, season 1 of Buffy
Yes,
is kind of superficial. There were some really good episodes in season 1, but it's a lot of X-Files pastiche, Twilight Zone
yeah.
pastiche. The last episode, the season finale, is quite strong, but then you're still balancing the monster of the week with the ongoing storyline. I remember when Mark Metcalf's character is killed off at the end of season 1, I was thinking, wait a minute, they just got rid of their big bad. What are they going to do for season 2? Little did I know they had bigger and better ideas in mind with one James Marsters.
Oh, absolutely. What a decision that is. You get in someone with that charisma. He walks in. It's like Spike is a character. He thinks this is his show, really.
And
And
later on, it would become
yeah,
his show when he joins the opening credits.
absolutely.
Mark Metcalf was terrific. The problem is, conceptually, if you have somebody playing a 10,000-year-old vampire who has to have fangs, the prosthetic fangs interfere with his diction, so his
Yes.
speech is not as crisp. So with Spike, you have a villain who can turn off his vamp face and speak in proper Sid Vicious-esque slang, rather than Mark Metcalf, who had that problem getting his words out from around the teeth.
Yeah, and it's kind of. I know Spike is not theoretically Buffy generation, but by kind of age, he is that kind of Buffy generation. It's like the punk villain. So they're the same. So it can kind of he wants to mess things up as much as young people always do. Whereas Master kind of wants he wants the way through things they always were. So it's a really nice shift in the show that, and I think that's the way. Yeah, that's the way Buffy kind of. That season 2 and 3, Buffy peaks me. I think between that and the Prom, which is just one of my favorite episodes of TV ever. I still cry every time at the end of that. Yeah, I can't listen to the Sundays version of Wild Horses without tearing up. It's wonderful. A TV show does that for you. What sort of TV show could do that to you? Little did I know Russell T Davies was only 2 years away in the future at that point.
Buffy was just so raw that 2 of the last 5 episodes of season 3 could not be broadcast because you had Columbine.
Oh, it was
So you had
Earthshock, wasn't it? Of course.
Earshot, and then they would not show Graduation Day Part 2 because it's where the class all stands up and grabs their weapons and starts firing on the principal and the mayor. Well, not the principal so much, but definitely the mayor, who's turned into the enormous snake demon. And they did not show that, but they showed it in Canada. So I was able to get copies on a tape from Shannon Patrick Sullivan from Newfoundland, who does the Doctor Who Brief History of Time Travel website. He got me those 2 on VHS. I was able to watch them before they ever aired terrestrially in the States. But that's how good Buffy season 3 was. 2 episodes were literally unairable because it just accurately predicted what was going to happen in Columbine. And now, of course, Columbine is a weekly occurrence, but that's a whole other podcast.
Yeah, and I think when we can't really deal within the context of Doctor Who generally, much as we love it, that's the limitation of Doctor Who's format. It doesn't do real life tragedy at all. It can't deal with that. But that's the great thing about it as well. It's escapism. Most of the time, as we'll come to, no doubt.
So that is a very good segue to Earthshock. I will point out that I did an interview with Stacy Smith, who did the Silver Archive on season 2 of Millennium, the X-Files sister show, which is Stacy calls it the best season of television you've never heard of.
Oh,
So I
it's
have an interview
wonderful.
for. Were you involved with that Silver Archive on the editing side?
Um, I got an early draft of it, but I don't think I I ended up getting my comments back because obviously the COVID pandemic got in the way. Stacey's such a wonderful writer on that sort of thing, though, and I really want to see
Absolutely.
Millennium because I think Millennium over here it had ITV. ITV bought that series for big money in the wake of the X-Files success because they thought it's going to be the next X-Files. And Millennium was really never a show that was never going to be the next X-Files. They ended up putting it late on a Sunday evening, and I don't think they showed past season 1 on it. So I think we had to scratch and search around to find Millennium beyond the end of season 1. So when I got hold of season 2, I was like, that was perfect. Before, obviously, I think Chris Carter came back for season 3. I just went, none of this ever happened, really. We're going back in our own direction.
But the Morgan and Wong season is the best of the show's 3 seasons because it's so inventive and goes off in so many unexpected directions. Fox
Oh,
gave it a
yes.
shot. They did a sequel to the Jose Chung episode because Charles Nelson
Oh,
Riley had been very, very good in that one X
yes.
Files. So they did a sequel, Jose Chung's Doomsday Defense for Millennium Season 2. And Fox decides to air both episodes on the same night back to back. So you have From
Oh,
Outer
wow.
Space and then Doomsday Defense airing for the rerun followed by the new episode, both with Charles Nelson Riley. And then you have the Alex Trebek and Jesse the Body Ventura cameos in the first hour. But they aired it Thanksgiving weekend, Friday, so absolutely nobody watched it. That was pretty much the end of
Wasted.
Millennium. Its finest hour could not get any viewers.
Oh, that's and it's kind of appropriate for Millennium the way it all ended up. It just never found the audience because, again, I don't think Fox was entirely the right channel for it. I don't think we'd be the most sympathetic to that kind of show. And I mean, somehow Satan got behind me as well. I love that episode. That the demons just meeting in that cafe.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Stacy points that out in the book. It's one of the best lines on television when the character is being threatened and he calls out, "Satan, save me!" And of course, Satan has no interest in doing that.
Yes. Oh, I'm going to have to dig the DVDs out again now, assuming they're not in storage.
Stacy's Silver Archive is just about as good as watching all 22 hours. But yeah, it does demand to be seen, and Stacy does a great job of pointing out why. And that's another
Uh,
great thing about the Silver Archives. They give you a second chance to discover this archival television, even if it's not, strictly speaking, our favorite show, Doctor Who.
oh, absolutely. You've got I think the other one, and was it Andrew Hickey did one on the Strange World of Gurney Slade, which is a total, it's totally obscure. Anthony Newley, back in the '60s. It's postmodern before postmodern was kind of even popularized. It's talking to the camera. It's I can't really describe it. It's supposed to be a comedy, and it is, but it's an absurdist kind of comedy. It's not. I know that Marx was. It's nothing like that. It's at a right angle to everything, even Python and that kind of thing. It's wonderful. So again, I would thoroughly recommend those. Certainly, those 2 Silver Archives. There's the best of the range, and I love the Sapphire and Steel ones as well. But I was so familiar with Sapphire and Steel. Whereas I think Millennium I'd seen once and a few episodes twice. Gurney Slade, I went straight out and bought the DVD. This is how good a properly written Silver Archive. It's a fresh perspective, and I mean that when I'm writing a Black Archive, so I want to kind of get at least one point that might stop the reader and go, "Hang on, yeah, they maybe didn't think of that." I think that's the point of the books. Even if it's just one thing, that's something you leave a reader with, something that might surprise you, something that gets your own perspective in. And maybe that can be difficult to go, well, I don't think of myself as any kind of genius. I say I'm here, I'm watching it, but just to try and think of something that maybe you haven't seen in common fan discussion. You might have seen it on the fringes of fan discussion. You might pick it up and run with it occasionally, but just something that makes you go back and watch it again with fresh eyes. And if someone does that after they've read my book, I've done my job more than enough. And if not, you paid your money and your opinion is entirely worth it. Is entirely, and you're right with it as well. And I'll happily take criticism.
So, what's your in for a story like Invasion of the Dinosaurs, which has some very strong things to say, but unfortunately, for the longest time, it was only remembered for the less than Jurassic Parkian dinosaur effects. So, how do you address a story that has a lot to say, but all anybody notices is the wobbly prop?
The in on that, I think it was pre-pandemic. It might have been Talons. It might have been the Talons screening at the BFI, or it was one of the Blu-ray screenings at the BFI. And I was talking to Jim Smith, and I pointed out to him the title's actually a pun because it's Invasion of Dinosaurs. Yes, you've got the dinosaurs, but the dinosaurs, you've got Charles Grover. He wants to turn things back to a golden age, like a dinosaur. It's a political dinosaur. So that's where I went. Right, I haven't seen anyone say that online, and I tested it out on Jim, and he just went, yeah. And if Jim Curry Smith hasn't thought of that, I'm going, that's a good basis to pitch something on. So I pitched it to Obverse. I found a few other things to say, particularly about, I think, the history of the Golden Ages, which are which I think is one of the best things I've written, to be honest, because it's a wonderful little chapter on just, where is humanity kind of gone with these Golden Ages? Where does it think of halcyon ages past? Why does it want to go back there? And why is it a common theme right from history, right from Greek legends, all the way back? And you can trace it right through to the present day. And the great thing with that chapter is you can then update it to particularly the current political situations. And, they're by no means unique political situations, I think. Certainly maybe extreme versions of them. But you can point out, that what Donald Trump was promising and what the Brexiters were promising with us was another golden age, that it could go back to this golden age of childhood, where everyone was happy. And it's point out, as Malcolm Hulke does, there's no such thing as a golden age. There's always reality. I think as the line Paul Cornell uses in one of the new adventures is, someone has to take the bins out. In Paradise, who takes the bins out?
That's what America was lacking in 2016, a John Pertwee type to stand up and say there never was a golden age.
Absolutely. So just some charismatic figure just to oppose it and point out that it's all nonsense. And it helps me see past that kind of, the dinosaurs. Again, with Doctor Who fans, the effect, we're used to being quite forgiving effects, because to a certain degree, Doctor Who in the 20th century is film theatre rather than kind of what we come to think of today as, the more kind of movie-based filming, maybe. The more touch gone for more of a kind of verisimilitude, for want of a better word, with a show with alien planets and aliens. It wants to. It's something you can just go, okay, I'll get past that. I know the effects aren't good. Barry Letts knew the effects weren't good. Terence knew the effects weren't good. But you can go back to it. It's where it maybe helps that so much of my conception of Doctor Who is based on the Target novels. Because before 1982 or so, was it? 1981. It'd be. I properly came on board with Logopolis, although I can remember bits and pieces before then. But most of what I've gone to with the Target books, and this is why I wasn't that interested in the Target books of the current stories. I was more interested in the older stories because I'd never experienced them. And you kind of think with so many of them missing and the way that things never get repeated, and we didn't get a video recorder till 1988. So there was no prospect of me seeing these stories, and I could get through all these Doctor Who stories just through the Target books. It's that's how important they were kind of back then. It was Doctor Who. So the great Target books give a different perspective on the story, but it's kind of getting back to the TV series. The TV series gave me a new perspective on the Target books more often than not.
Because you're coming to those second. So, unlike the Dinosaur Invasion, which is a Malcolm Hulk novelization which substantially rewrites the TV, expands the opening material at the expense of a lot of the runaround chase scenes, and gives a different ending. Earthshock is not Ian Marter taking a script and turning it into something new the way that Malcolm Hulk does. Ian Marter is going back in time and giving us the draft script before Peter Grimwade gets his hands on it and doubles the scene count and moves a lot of the dialogue around. So, when did you first see Earthshock? Was it on original airing, or did you not see it until after you already had the novelization?
It would have been on first airing because that was kind of the Gopolis was what made me a fan. I'd say that I have to confess to a heresy. I did abandon season 18. I was watching Buck Rogers on the other side.
Oh, so you're the reason the ratings went down.
Yes, it's all down to me. I confess. Sorry, Tom, I betrayed you. But I came back for the Gopolis, and the Gopolis had such a sense of occasion, such an atmosphere. And as a I wasn't even quite 7 then. It was not long before my 7th birthday. You're watching that, and it feels so big because of that doomy atmosphere, and the end of the universe is nigh. And I think I've spoken to you on Twitter about this, and the Target novelization as well is just it gives it such resonance. Almost, is it Paradise Lost? I think it really riffs on a lot.
Yes, the Doctor gives Adric a bound volume of Paradise Lost, so the Doctor can answer the cloister bell in peace. And Adric starts making comparisons between the plot of Legopolis and the plot of what he's reading in Paradise Lost. And Bidmead keeps coming back to it in several later chapters. So Paradise Lost becomes the underpinning of the text, with the fallen angel being the master as a fallen Time Lord.
Absolutely. Yeah. I know it might not be so, but it's so beautifully done. And I think as you were talking to Graham a couple of weeks ago, those Bidmead novelizations are just so fantastic. They give a depth to the texts, to the shows that they novelize. I don't think Earthshock particularly does that, but I don't think there's that much depth to Earthshock.
There are flaws to the Earthshock script, which are lovingly detailed in the discontinuity guide and in the Blu-ray production notes. You could second guess a lot of the things that happen within the story, but for me, I came to Earthshock fairly early in my fandom, and I had already had the ending spoiled for me. So for me, the fact that the Cybermen were in it was not a surprise. For me, what happens to Adric at the end, not a surprise, but I still loved it. And that and Resurrection of the Daleks, my first actual Dalek story in the wild, I still love those two. And I acknowledge that people don't like them, but I can't even acknowledge their flaws because for me, those stories take me back to when I first saw them. And the illusion still works for me. The constant movement manages to distract my eye from the fact that maybe the plot isn't so structurally sound. It doesn't bother me at all. So when you first see Earthshock, I expect that the Cybermen were a complete surprise to you, and
Totally.
Adric's departure a complete surprise to you.
Totally. Yeah. It's just watching it because I was kind of a little bit familiar with the history of Doctor Who. I think I got the program guides by then, so I knew the synopsis, I knew what happened. And yet the one thing, a proper companion doesn't die. It never happens in Doctor Who. You're just watching it going, what the hell is that? And that Earthshock, it's almost kind of a throwback on that front, because you're just kind of reaching the age when, or in television says, where particularly in British television, they're getting the concept of repeats of second showings, and I think Earthshock gets a showing of, is it the summer afterwards, or either 83 or 84? I'm not quite sure. And it's depends almost entirely on that kind of that visceral impact of the shocks. And once you've got them there, is the story's a bit thin to it's a case. It's a bit like what to a certain degree what Bob Holmes does is you're just trying to get from set piece to set piece. And yeah, it particularly with Peter Grimwade's direction, it does that pretty effectively. But I really think, despite that, is some of the things I love what Ian Marter does here. I think it's a story that's kind of crying out for Terence to novelize it, because Terence was a guy who would quietly fix all those little logical flaws and make it a coherent kind of story, which you need in a novel.
Yes, and he would point them out in the text and say, "This is ridiculous, but what really happened is this."
Yes. Or as with the android invasion, here's an ending.
The last line of the book: "The android invasion was over," which is Terence breathing a sigh of relief as he finally stands up from behind his desk.
Yes, you can imagine that, can't you? Having met Terence once, a few maybe some choice language thrown in there as well, and down the pub straight afterwards.
So here are the numbers. Earthshock is repeat as part of the Doctor Who and the Monsters season in August 1982. So it's rescreened 5 months after the original airing. And it does very well in the ratings. It's run as a 2-week omnibus, parts 1 and 2 together, parts 3 and 4 together. 4.9 million viewers for the first half, 5.2 million for the second half, which is more than 50% of the people who watched it the first time out. For a rerun, that's very, very good.
Yeah, particularly in the summer as well, because that's usually filler material that's looked to be put out in the summer. Was that Curse of Peldon and Genesis, perhaps, I think, as well? Oh, they might have been repeating the other part of that season. Because I remember Curse of Peldon, they repeat that, and I didn't know about it, so I missed it. So I had to wait another 11 years to see it. It wasn't until it came out on VHS. A friend came into school next day and said, "Oh, do you see that? Yeah, Joe's Princess of Tarzan." So, no.
That's the worst feeling. And this is, of course, before. Now with streaming, if you miss it, you just dial it back up and watch it whenever you want. But not so long ago, we either had one shot at it or it was gone forever.
Yeah, and it's a better world for the fact we can see things again.
Yes, and it's a better world for the fact that we have Earthshock on Blu-ray. So even while the production notes are pointing out the flaws in the story, we can watch it in high resolution with a making of, and a commentary, and a behind the sofa. We can watch it in several different ways.
Oh, absolutely! I'd love those behind the sofas. The Davison crew on their own stories is just fantastic. They're so mean, aren't they?
But it's good you have a balance. You have 3 or 4 different sets of talking heads. So while Peter and Janet are going to town hating on the story, the other commentators usually are very fond of it and point out what's nice about it. So you get a good mix of opinions.
Absolutely, yeah. It's lovely to see people, and it's watched with the intention of being kind. Whereas I think Peter and Janet are more, almost doing it in more kind of the way certain a lot of British fans do it, lovingly mocking it almost. It is part of their career, and they're not going to say it's terrible except unless I think Peter says it in was it the Doctor's DVD? If you remember that one, dismiss the whole era. But I mean, Earthshock. And again, I think the problem you allude to, he had the draft scripts, Ian Marter, but it's a kind of problem. I think it doesn't affect many stories, but I think I'd go something like Warrior's Gate, Kinder, and this. It's the directors, what they bring to it is so much, and it's Doctor Who. It is in a visual medium, but you're kind of trying to forgive it to being flawed in a visual medium. And these guys, the directors are bringing stuff that's not there in the story. So the books are often entirely different entities in a lot of ways. Because Earthshock, the pacing is very strange, a lot of it. in the book, but in the novel, it's on screen, it's relentless and it's wonderful. And it's when you hit those shocks, when you hit that first appearance of Cybermen, or when Adric dies, you've been worked up into a point where these things have so much impact. And
Whereas the revelation of the Cybermen in this story is buried in mid-chapter, does not even get its own chapter-ending cliffhanger.
That's chapter 2 doesn't even. It is a page away from the end of a chapter, I think, on the cliffhanger on that. It's kind of odd. I'm kind of wondering if those are, particularly with that second chapter, where they moved the cliffhanger slightly for more impact, maybe. Because but then again, it's that first half of the book is the same thing as a lot of Eric Saywood scripts. They're walking around, spending the first half of the story waiting to actually get to meet the story. So everything's chugging away while the Doctor stays away.
When Eric Sayward comes around to novelize Attack of the Cybermen in the late 1980s, he will do the same thing. He will take a frenetic story and he will slow it down, and he'll take entire scenes from throughout 45 minutes of part one and condense it all into a single chapter. So you meet one character, stay with them for a chapter, move to a different locale for chapter 2, a third locale for chapter 3. So Attack of the Cybermen almost undoes what Matthew Robinson did as director and tells a different story with a different emphasis and a different focus. But again, Marter is just adapting before Peter Grimwade got involved. So that's why the reveal of the Cybermen, they're not even called Cybermen when they're introduced. As you point out, chapter 2 ends on page 30. The cliffhanger falls in the middle of page 38, but you don't know that they're Cybermen until several pages later. Whereas on television, you have almost a crash zoom on David Banks' helmet, and of course the energetic closing credits right after that with the cliffhanger sting. You don't get that in the book.
I think it's only I think Mark kind of struggles a bit of when to name them. I think it gets to, is it a point of there's the line about cyber technology, and from then on, yes, then they're Cybermen, but it's really understated. It doesn't hit the shocks, and even at the end, going forward at the end, the scene order is strange. It's there's the Adric, there's the freighter going, then there's cut back, and they deal with the cyber deputy, and there's a whole scene, and then they look back up at the freighter. It kind of kills the impact almost a little.
Yeah, I get to that a little bit, and the other half of the show after the break, when I do my audio essay on the text of the book, I'll be touching on some of that. But you're right, page 37, we're introduced to the Cybermen with a very graphic description of not just the costumes, but also the sounds and the smells. That's page 37, but they're not named. At the end of the chapter, page 43, the Doctor says this says cyber technology. Not the Doctor, it's the cyber leader says cyber technology, but he's only called leader. You don't know that he's the Cyberman until he says cyber technology. End of 43, chapter 3. If Terrence Dix was writing it, the very next scene would have been the formal, these are the Cybermen, this is their history. But instead, Ian doesn't come back to it until page 47, and now the leader is renamed the Cyber Leader. It is an odd way of introducing them. It's strung out over a series of 11 pages.
And I think it's the renamed cyber deputy as well, because I think he's trying not to get the lieutenants confused. I think Jim points out on his blog again. Because I think the only time I did a Target marathon, I think it was 93. I thought 30th anniversary. I haven't by any means got all the stories. I want to go through as much Doctor as possible. I was going to go through all the Target novelizations, so I went through them all chronological order, and I didn't have half the revelations that Jim did. And that's such a wonderful series to follow. Just reading that, I think it was every week. Come back, great. Get my cup of tea on a Saturday morning, and and I can go back and reread them.
I would set my Twitter. I didn't discover the blog until he was about halfway through, but then I would get a push notification. So I'd wake up on Saturday morning U.S. time, and there's Jim's latest entry on Twitter. And it was always some discovery or revelation that I just had not thought of. And very quickly I reached out to him to become a part of this show, and he's obviously a very big voice on the show now. But following his blog was one of the true pleasures of the pandemic, and I'm only sorry that I missed the first several months of it because I just didn't know.
Yeah, because I moved back from Belfast to Newport, my hometown. I think just about that. Most of my Doctor Who books were in storage for the pandemic, and Jim's blog was part of the reason I went. I need to get my books back because they're just my happy place, you know. So yeah, so I've got all the books kind of behind me out storage, still in the storage boxes because it's the easiest way I've got to keep them in order in piles. And the greatest thing is because obviously my son's a fan, he's converted his cousins as well, and my cousin, my niece in particular. I was talking to my sister, and she went, "Oh yeah, you'll never guess what they went and they found in the charity shop. The first things they bought." I said, "Yeah, they bought Doctor Who books, and you know when she wants some reading material on holiday, yeah, she's just bought DWM. So I have converted my family. I've converted my sister's family. So, so you know, I'm working on it one person at a time. And if there are grandchildren or grand niece, whatever, I think we'll work on that too. Keep the next generations coming.
I will have to find somebody to pass all my targets on to after I'm no longer around to read them. So, what was your reaction in 1982 when Adric is killed on screen? So you said that, of course, Doctor Who wasn't doing this. How long did it take you to realize, oh my goodness, he's gone forever? And what was your reaction when he briefly returns in part 2 of Time Flight a couple of weeks later?
Oh, it's they ran the credits in silence as well. You're just going, and that's a brilliant call because it gives you time to think about it. It deepens that impact. Whereas it's not just on to the next adventure as is usual with Doctor Who. So yeah, again, I think it was when did I shoot 82? It was I literally just turned 8 the week before that cliffhanger before the Adrix, and you're just there going. I think I was slack jawed. I didn't speak for about half an hour afterwards because I know it's fashionable to say that Matthew Warthouse's performance isn't that great, or he doesn't know what to do with his hands. He's not a great actor, but the impact of that scene just on an 8-year-old. This isn't supposed to happen in Doctor Who, and then you get to the first scene of Time Flight next week, which is almost. Oh, well, there you go. Let's just get on with it.
Too bad.
No.
So sad.
Yeah. So it's kind of. I think that you maybe need that as a child, as a kind of audience with children. There, you need to go. Life goes on. You need to move on. It's maybe not healthy. Something like Heaven Sent is a far healthier kind of exploration of what happens when people die. Where does your head go? It goes over there. And yeah, when he popped up, I don't think it was much impact because it was there mainly to fill the Radio Times, and we didn't get the Radio Times.
Mm.
So, yeah, it was just, it's a hologram Vadric. Fair enough.
Another controversial part of Earthshock is the casting of Beryl Reed. Now, for me in the States, I would have had no idea who she was, and I was not aware this was stunt casting. It would be the same later on with Ken Dodd and Nicholas Parsons. I didn't have that cultural frame of reference. I wasn't looking at this as ill-advised stunt casting or miscasting. I was just taking the performances as you see them on screen. So I think, and I'll mention this a little bit later in the program, which I've already recorded, Beryl Reed, I think, does a terrific job. I wouldn't have known that she was playing against type, perhaps, but this is not the kind of person that you ordinarily see playing a hard-bitten space captain. And I think she crushes it. I think she does a great job. And looking at some of the other written reviews of Earthshock, looking perhaps at the production notes on the Blu-ray, maybe I'm one of the few who feels that way, but I think she's giving a real three-dimensional lived-in performance, even if she personally didn't follow every twist and turn in the script. when you first saw this, were you aware of her perhaps as a children's presenter? What was your reaction to her showing up on Doctor Who the way that she does?
Yeah, I mean, I knew her as a children's presenter. I think she was on children's ITV at the time. There was, I can't remember what the name of the show was, but she was with a puppet called Mooncat. So I'm like, oh, this is the woman from this coming onto it. It's like Chloe Ashcroft is in Resurrection of the Daleks. She was a children's TV presenter too. So that's where I came from with them, and I kind of accepted that. But I remember it was it's got to be 7 years ago. Someone asked me to write for Celestial Toy Room about great guest performances in Doctor Who, and I went straight away. I want to write about Beryl Reid in Earthshock
Oh, nice.
because it's again the great thing is it's casting its type, and I think it's what gives Earthshock some real substance. Because as written, I think Briggs is just this standard hard-bitten space captain, almost kind of just a straightforward Eric Saywood character, and that's fine. But it would just be kind of someone unmemorable. You get maybe one of the hard man from 80s movies in there, and yeah, they could do a job. But you put Beryl Reid in there, instantly you're going, hang on, this is something slightly different. And Beryl Reid, for all the fact I knew her from children's TV, she's such a good actress in her own right, because particularly in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy and Smiley's People, she's got a small but key role, but she is so good in that. She basically outlines the whole theme of the show in one scene with Alec Guinness. And Peter Grimway worked on that, and I think he didn't particularly like the casting then. About Reid then. Going, why? You know how good she is, and and that performance. I think we're it's maybe part of the thing. We're too familiar with the anecdotes. Peter Davis saying she didn't know what she was doing with science fiction, and maybe she didn't, but it doesn't matter because she's playing it as it's just science fiction trans, but it's a freighter captain. So it's just someone trying to get their cargo, trying to get their bonus, someone relatable in a job with just a very human aim. And all of a sudden, in comes the Doctor. Who's this weirdo? What how he got on the ship just by materializing? What? It's a very human performance, and she's very, very good in it. And I think there's a one line of hers which kind of does work, which I don't know if Ian Marter could kind of type with a straight face. Apprehended. Why can't you just say caught?
Yes.
So the way Ian Marter just kind of uses different words for said every time, I'm going, can you really type that with a straight face, Ian?
No, I'm glad to hear you say that about Beryl Reid's performance here. So, when would you have first gotten the novelization? Because it comes out about a year and a half later. Was this did you get this early on, or did this come to you later on?
It would have been at the time, because I think it was just a case of I was just rabid for Doctor Who novelization at this point. It's if I'm going to town, first port of call, Smith's in town, W.H. Smith's in town, upstairs, what's in the Doctor Who section? And I was looking for the older books. So you flick through them, what's different this week? Has someone been in to buy this stuff? So yeah, it would have been would have been probably within a month or two of it coming out, if not the actual week of it coming out.
And we've talked a little bit about how Terrence would have written this. How does Ian Marter's writing style hold up? I will, of course, be discussing this after the break, but what do you think of Marter's prose style in this book versus his many other targets?
Yeah, I think, again, as I said, it's kind of, earlier I said, kind of baroque. It's a bit sort of Grand Guignol, kind of going really for the horror. The Cybermen, I think he really does sell the Cybermen. Particularly, he gives the Cybermen a smell, and you don't kind of think of that, on screen, because obviously TV doesn't have the capacity to do that medium as yet.
Right. This is not scratch and sniff television. Yes.
No, but you've got that. They're leaking oil all over the place. They're big. He uses the physicality of them. Although I think there's one point that they're invulnerable. I think Scott says that they've got the same lasers as us, and I don't see too many of them, those Cybermen down. And all of a sudden, next one, concentrate laser fire. Boom. Oh, there they go. So it doesn't kind of. I suppose it's a typical Cybermen thing, isn't it? That they're invulnerable. No, they're not really.
They're invulnerable until the very end of part 4, typically.
Yes, until the weakness of the month comes in.
And in this story, it happens to be gold, which is a carryover from Revenge of the Cybermen. But I think the biggest tribute to Earthshock is that it has had long legs culturally. So you and I were talking offline about Gail Ann Hurd, who co-wrote Terminator, and was recently on Twitter talking about how real-life events are starting to mimic Skynet. And of course, Jay, right-wing Twitter user, decides to mansplain to her what the Terminator is, and of course, not aware that she was the co-writer. She also co-writes Aliens, and I'm positive she would not have been a Doctor Who fan. I'm positive she would not have seen this, but I think there's a lot you could draw lines between the cave sequence in Earthshock and what comes later in the Alien franchise.
Very much.
Not to mention, if you look at Ascension of the Cybermen, the Chris Chibnall story, I think that owes a tremendous conscious debt to Earthshock.
Oh, I think, yeah, I think Chris Chibnall owes a lot to the Eric Sayward era, in particular. You can see that kind of 17, that full TARDIS of 4 people for a start off. I know that's partly going back to Doctor Who's roots, but he's kind of going for that tone with the action. It's almost more of an action series at times rather than the thoughtful one, rather than the kind of clever one that you'd been seeing under Moffat. Where the scripting is almost the important thing. The twists, the engagement. Christian wants to keep it excited. I mean, again, you can even see it in something like Praxeus, where it's a case of you just keep things going relentlessly. Don't stop to think. Maybe it doesn't all hold together. Maybe the characters could hit the final location a lot earlier. But it's exactly what he does. It's I mean, that clip with him on I think Open Air, it's massively overstated. And let's face it, which of us would really want to see ourselves at 16 or 17 on that, having those opinions preserved forever? Particularly if in your future you're going to be the showrunner, you're going to get that back in triplicate.
That's a really interesting point, because most of my contributions to Recart's Doctor Who are still preserved on Google Groups, where Recart's Doctor Who is actually an ongoing thing, although I haven't been contributing in over 20 years. I will sometimes go back to the Google Groups archive. Like for Warriors of the Deep, Johnny Byrne was on Recart's Doctor Who, and he posted a very long breakdown of how his Warriors was nothing like the one that Eric Sayward rewrote. And he finds a lot of fault with the Warriors as produced. And he says, this is what I would have written, and this is what I had in mind. And that's preserved in amber on records, and it's great. However, that's Johnny Byrne. When you go back and look at what Jason was writing on records 30 years ago, I will sometimes go to my reviews of stories or books from 30 years ago, and I'll try and, just to save time, incorporate them into my script for this program. It doesn't work. The stuff that I wrote 30 years ago, I don't agree with any of it, because I'm trying to say what other fans say in order to fit in. I can see myself borrowing other people's language to make a point that I saw somebody else make to try and fit in with the crowd, and I was never really giving my own opinion. So when I do give my opinion, it's great. I just can't find a lot of it. A lot of what I see is just mirroring other people's points, so I can't use any of my material. Johnny Byrne comes to Rec Arts, tells the truth. I went to Rec Arts, and I don't even know what I was saying. Doesn't age. My opinions from ages 19 and 20 have not aged very well, put it that way.
None of us, I don't think. No, I was really lucky in that I didn't get properly online until I was about 24, 25, so it was 1999. So I was only there quite late in RADW's lifespan. So I was more on Jade Pagoda, I think, and fortunately that's been lost to a few crashes in servers over the years. So yeah, me being 20-year-old and mouthy, and I think it's quite fortunate I didn't get online till relatively late, because yeah, I feel so sorry for the people who actually get online now almost from 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever it is. because you're almost trapped in amber by that young self of yours, and you're almost denied the chance to change and grow. And we have all changed and grown over the years. And you go back to reading some of the targets. My opinions have changed hugely on some of these over the years. I think when I was younger, I didn't think that much of Doctor Who and the Daleks. I go back now and I go, that's such a brilliant kids' book. Donald Cotton, yeah. The reviews all said it was brilliant, or the Mythmakers go, that was brilliant. I was like, yeah, it's okay. And then I go back again when I'm 20, 25, and I can understand the references. Oh my God, they're a revelation almost, I think.
That's why I enjoy doing this podcast so much, because the targets are not flat children's literature. They grow with the audience, and I get as much out of these books now in my what I charitably call my mid-40s. I still enjoy reading these a book a week, and some are better than others, but there's a lot of good prose, there's a lot of good writing, there's a lot of sarcasm, especially with Terrence Dicks. You get a lot of him throwing shade at a story he doesn't like, or mythologizing a story that he does like. So even though he's writing very short books, there's added value on every single page. This is not mere disposable fiction aimed at a 7-year-old and written to a word count. These are books that really care, and I'm glad that you're here with me to discuss both the novelization and Earthshock on TV. But what I want to do now, during the little time remaining to us, is I want to challenge you to a game of 20 questions. All right, so John, you know the drill. I am one Doctor Who story selected at random between 1963 and 2022, the entire run of the series, using 20 yes or no questions. You have to guess which story I am. What is your question number one?
Okay, are you a 20th century Doctor Who story?
Yes, I am. I am a 20th century story. Question two.
Are you a black and white story?
Yes, I am a black and white story. So you've narrowed down the whole of Doctor Who to 60 seasons. Question
That's
three.
not bad. the ones with the most stories. Are you a Patrick Troughton story?
See, that's interesting. I thought you would go in chronological order. You're taking this backwards. No, I am not a Patrick Troughton story.
Ooh,
Question four.
Now, let's have a think. Are you produced by Verity Lambert as a story?
Yes, I am produced by Verity Lambert. So now we're on question five, and you've narrowed down the entire show to just about 2 seasons. Although, of course, those are very dense seasons with a lot of material.
This is it. Although there are, I think, 2 seasons and 1 story, isn't it?
Question five.
Okay. Are you a season 2 story?
Well, see, again, you're doing this backwards. I would have thought you would start at season 1, but that's interesting. So, yes, I am a season 2 story.
Ooh, now.
Produced as part of season 2, aired as part of season 2. Now, I don't think you're going to get the record. I think the record is 5, but you're very close to the top of the leaderboard. And there are now fewer stories to choose from than questions remaining. So you're guaranteed to win, unlike ChatGPT. What's your question 6?
Are there Daleks in the story?
Yes, there are Daleks in the story. Question 7.
Ooh. Are you the Chase?
No, I am not the Chase. Question 8.
Okay. Are you the Dalek invasion of Earth?
This is going to give it away, but no, I am not the Dalek invasion of Earth. Question 9.
Okay. Are you the Space Museum?
Yes, I am the Space Museum.
Yes.
Ding, ding, ding. That's excellent for your first time out. No, you found the densest part of the show, season 2, which is I think 9 serial
stories.
But,
yeah.
Yeah, the Dalek is a trick question, but yes, there's a Dalek prop in episode 1, and then a Dalek actually appears in episode 4. So it is a story with Daleks.
Yeah, I was contemplating, can I narrow it down between the Space Museum and the other two? But I'm like, no, I'll go the other way.
So that's terrific. So, John, where else can we find you online? I know apart from your prolific writing, you also have some other podcasts you might want to talk about.
I do. I know it's soccer or football. I do the Busting Balls podcast with my good friend Jeff Wessel, who we met on Doctor Who mailing lists. And we actually set up a spin-off from a Doctor Who books list on football with, I think, Stuart from the Obverse publisher. I'm on the Strangers in Space podcast quite regularly, where we sometimes talk about Doctor Who and talk more about films or TV that's on.
That may be the
and-
only podcast in history named after the Sensorites.
Yeah, I think it must be. Who else would do that? I'll have a word with JR about that.
I would. I am a
Why?
huge Sensorites fan in a
Yes.
non-ironic way, but that's a story for another day on this show.
Oh, that first episode is just again spine-tingling bit of television. And I will be on Ian Martin's "We're All Stories in the End" podcast in sometime in the upcoming season 2.
Which book are you covering? Do you know?
I'm covering 2 books. I'm covering Christmas on a Rational Planet and Conundrum.
Ah, yes, I did in season 1. I was on Camera Obscura. It took me a while to realize he was going in chronological, in alphabetical order, I should say.
Yes. I tell you, why did you do it like that? Why not?
Now, we had a lot of fun talking Camera Obscura, so hopefully I'll come back for season 2. But I'll point out that Jeff and I also know each other going back to the 1990s, because he and I were both on Alt Doctor Who Creative, and there was a lot of round-robin fan fiction. So there was
Oh,
the
wow.
Eighth Doctors, and then there were past Doctors. So he and I we both wrote adjoining chapters of a couple of different round-robin stories. So also we talked quite a bit on IRC back in the day and our social media. Yeah, Jeff is a great guy.
I can't fault that. Yeah, Camera Obscura was a wonderful book. I think you really did that justice as well. Thoroughly
Thanks.
enjoyed
Yeah.
that.
And Jeff will also be on this show in the distant future. I'm pretty much booked for the next year, but Jeff will be on towards the end of that run. So we'll be hearing from your soccer podcast partner on Doctor Who literature before too much longer goes by.
Oh, fabulous. I'm looking forward to that one. Yeah, and I love a round robin story. I always have that. Because part of the thing, I think, particularly when you're writing, even if it's just with you and an editor, it's that back and forth that really kind of gives something a spark that makes it. Because whatever you've got in your own head, you're never going to get it properly on the page. But a really good editor or a good collaborator friend, they really do help.
He and I would talk on IRC and polish each other's ideas. But then, of course, when you're writing 12 people to a 12-chapter story,
Yeah.
a lot of your ideas are not going to get passed on to the other writers, and they kind of disappear into the ether. So I would leave hints, but nobody else would pick up on them.
Oh, yeah. And he's just written a comic as well. So don't quite have to. Warbirds just came out.
That's right.
Terrific story. So yeah, it's kind of lovely to still see the names from those days who you're hanging around with coming through and coming up with creative ideas. I mean, you're working with Steve Parkhouse. My God.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading Steve Parkhouse, and because they had adapted some of the DWM comic strips for a Marvel Comics magazine that ran for 23 issues in the States, Doctor Who.
Yes.
So Steve Parkhouse had a lot of reprints in there. That's how I know his name from growing up in the mid-'80s.
Yeah, and obviously I just knew it from 2000 AD and then from DWM comics. Oh, those DWM comic strips. Yeah, again, the 80s. That's your roots of your expanded universe. All the different storytelling.
My first comic would have been the Stockbridge Horror, which was issue 20 of the short-lived Marvel Doctor Who title.
Oh, I think I have one of the Marvel. Was it Marvel Comics Presents? And it was the not called Land of the Dead, but yeah, it was the one with the emotions. And the title's just blanked on my head for no reason at all. But
I know that the Stockbridge stories later wound up as Big Finish adaptations, so these things have a way of living forever and coming back in different media.
Yeah, well, particularly I say when we're going to see in November with the Star Beast.
Beep the Meep, that's right.
Oh, and the Wrath Warriors. Oh, I'm so looking forward to that. It's perfect. It's that child. It's taking Doctor Who back to you're in a child again, isn't it? Those things you always wanted to see.
Yeah, it's a great time to be a fan. So, John, thanks so much for coming on. We're going to try and book you for a return appearance, but thanks so much for being a good sport and doing well in 20 questions. And, John, I'll talk to you real soon.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Doctor Who, Earthshock by Ian Marter, televised as Earthshock, teleplay by Eric Sayward, televised in March 1982, paperback release date August 18, 1983, target book number 78. A group of paleontologists have been savagely attacked while carrying out a study of fossilized dinosaur remains in an underground cave system on 25th century Earth. A party of troopers and Professor Kyle, the only survivor of the attack, are investigating the deaths of her colleagues when they discover the Doctor and his companions at the site of the massacre. The time travelers are immediately suspected. In trying to establish their innocence and find out who or what was responsible for the killings, the Doctor is confronted by an old enemy. Although Eric Sayward had previously novelized his first Doctor Who script, The Visitation, episode 70 of this podcast, he was unavailable to adapt his second script, Earthshock, probably because he was busy script editing the TV series at the same time. Stepping into the breach, Ian Marter, whose last Target novelization had been Doctor Who and the Enemy of the World, episode 64 of this podcast. This is the beginning of Marter's golden age of Target novelizations. He'd already adapted 3 Tom Baker scripts in the 1970s, 2 of which he'd appeared in on TV, and Enemy of the World for good measure after David Whittaker died. Reminder, you can see page 1 of Whittaker's Enemy novelization draft on Simon Gurrier's Twitter feed, which I believe I linked to in episode 76 of this podcast. But from this point on, Marter is going to become a regular in the Target stable. Beginning with Earthshock, he'd publish a novelization a year, with The Rescue coming out posthumously in 1988, and with Harry Sullivan's War, an original novel, in there as well, all of which we'll be covering on this show in the weeks and months to come. And Marter would wind up writing for 4 of the first 5 TV Doctors. Marter's stock in trade as a writer is the 5 senses. His books are keen on describing sounds, smells, all the sensations, with graphic violence to cover the sense of sight. All of which is a long way of coming around to say that Ian Marter is an odd choice to adapt a Peter Davison story. Marter's niche was almost as the Stephen King of the Target line. Someone who loved describing gouts of blood and other novelly horrific death scenes. These are admirable traits, surely, but don't necessarily match up with Davison's genial, if occasionally harried, old soul of a 5th Doctor, even if Sayward was the scriptwriter for this story. So let's talk about the aspects of Marter's writing that make this book stand out. The behind-the-scenes detail, the graphic content, the portrayal of the TARDIS crew, and Marter's overall literary style. The most remarkable feature of the Earthshock novelization is that this is not the story you watched on television. Oh, the main plot beats are there, but the scene structure and dialogue are radically different. And this is not Marter tearing up Sayward's scripts and trying to improve them by drastic rewrites. Instead, this is Marter novelizing the camera scripts, which was the Target House style. In this case, director Peter Grimwade had performed his own radical surgery on the Sayward scripts that Marter was adapting. Grimwade famously doubled the scene count in order to increase the story's pace. Single scenes in the novelization, such as TARDIS scenes in the Part 3 material, might take up 4 separate scenes on TV. Grimwade truncated a lot of dialogue and reassigned some of the who says what. You'll also be interested to see which lines from TV are not in the book, most notably the Doctor's Black Orchid callback, the Captain Oates quote from Part 1.
I'm going outside now. I might be gone some time.
And the Cyber Leader's declaration in Part 2.
What is that? I know that object.
And I love that little musical quote from the opening title music, don't you? As with the novelization of The Visitation, Sayward's scripts do not play well with the standard Terence Dickian 12-chapter novelization format. Here, the Part 1 Cyberman reveal is buried in mid-chapter, which is not how John Nathan Turner imagined this story for television, and Marter doesn't even come out and actually say the word Cyberman until later on. The cyber lieutenant on TV is still called the deputy here. The names of the disposable troopers and freighter crew are different in print, and Tegan does not burst into cry laughter when Adric dies. In terms of splatter content, Marter and Sayward end up being a surprisingly great fit for one another. Marter, who was previously best known for co-starring in the gothic Philip Hinchcliffe era, and with Sayward being more or less the anti-Hinchcliffe, but Marter knows what tone Sayward is looking for, and gives it to us in spades and buckets. The opening shot of the novelization, quote, "The towering cliffside resembled a gigantic human skull, with the dark openings of caves gaping like empty eye sockets and nostrils." Already we're a long way removed from Terrance Dicks, who might well have opened Chapter 1 with a punchier but far less ominous, "It was a barren wasteland." In fact, that would be a fun thought experiment or parlor game. Come up with a Terrance Dicks style opening sentence for every single Target novelization, even the ones that Terrance did not write. Marter also has the expedition crawl through several hundred meters of caves, which obviously could not be realized in TV Center. Even the appearance of the TARDIS is written as a hideously freakish disaster, as the cave's, quote, "deathly silence" is invaded by a, quote, "harsh scraping and whirring noise," and a final series of raucous shrieks, at which point the battered TARDIS is enveloped by a dense cluster of swirling black drapery. Again, this is light years from Terrance and his simple, kindly, wheezing groaning sound. And then we get to the android massacre, in what was Doctor Who's freakishly prescient restaging of Aliens 4 years before James Cameron made it to London, albeit James with a much higher budget in his pocket. Eric Sayward kills off several soldiers in Part 1 at the hands of the two androids. The TV deaths were quick and bloodless, but Marter draws out each one in at times nauseating detail. Here are some selections. She was standing in a shallow pool of steaming, viscous liquid, in which were floating the scorched and tattered uniforms of two troopers. A sickly smell hung on the crackling air. Snyder's empty uniform collapsed into a puddle of sticky, oozing froth. His uniform crumpled like an empty sack amid billows of rubbery smoke. This may be a bit much, but you can't deny that Marter knows how to use the English language as a deadly weapon. Earthshock is best remembered for its immense body count and a huge number of disposable soldiers. Well, check that. Earthshock is also best known for Adric's departure, and of course the interminable TARDIS crew fight scenes, which take up most of the first 10 minutes of Part 1. But going back to the immense body count and huge number of disposable soldiers, even Ringway, the story's sniveling human traitor, dies in horrific fashion in Marter's hands. Quote, "A sudden, devastating bolt of energy sent him reeling against the console, and his broken body slid to the deck, his face fixed in horror." That is not how Peter Grimway directed Ringway's death on TV. That's for sure. One element of Marter's writing style, which has not aged very well, is his portrayal of women. This is a glaring issue for us, sitting 40 years in the future, and we'll see a little bit more of this when I reach Terence Dudley's novelization of The King's Demons. Professor Kyle is described in this book as, quote, "a rather plain, plumpish woman." Later on, Marter describes Kyle's ample bosom, which, no, just no.
I really don't think so. I really don't think so at all.
But wait, you also get Snyder, one of the disposable Earth troopers from Part 1, is called, quote, "a dumpy little figure." Now, Marter does enjoy writing for the Fifth Doctor, whom he describes as, quote, "a self-possessed young man dressed in carnival clothes." In fact, reading the Davison books in publication order, this is the first time that we get a full description of each character's wardrobe, so much so that you'd expect that Marter was getting a kickback from JNT, who wanted his regulars dressed the same week in and week out in highly marketable attire. Now, the Fifth Doctor in Earthshock via the Sayward script does not have his finest hour. In the book, he inadvertently triggers the awakening of the Cyberman whose actions seal Adric's fate. He also hesitates too long when the Cyber leader threatens Adric's life, to the point where Adric believes the Doctor is going to let Tegan die in order to prove a rhetorical point. page 102. The leader flung Tegan roughly away from them and turned to a cyber guard. "Kill the female," he ordered coldly. The doctor screwed up his hat in anguish as he watched the Cyberman raise its blaster. Tegan said nothing, but her wide-eyed terror overwhelmed Adric, Berger, and Briggs, who stood in frozen silence gazing expectantly at the doctor. Sweat broke out on the doctor's face as he resisted the urge to intervene, and his knuckles went white. A vivid trickle of blood oozed slowly down Tegan's chin from where she had bitten her lip, and the doctor stared at the red rivulet as if transfixed. Slowly, very slowly, the Cyberman's massive finger tightened on the trigger button, but still the doctor resisted. Adric watched him incredulously, wondering whether perhaps he might even be prepared to sacrifice Tegan's life for the sake of winning the psychological struggle against the cyber leader. The doctor's youth and helplessness, and a concealed violent rage against the cyber leader are all given considerable emphasis over what we saw on television. At the end, the doctor gives up on trying to save Adric, even before the freighter crashes into Earth. Page 125. Right after a cyber gun has blasted the console. Quote, "At once the doctor turned to the damaged console and began frantically trying to repair the section hit by the blaster. Nissa helped Tegan to her feet. 'Doctor, please hurry. We must get Adric off the freighter,' she pleaded. The doctor shook his head helplessly and gestured at the shattered instruments. 'Please, doctor, we must save him,' Tegan cried, turning to the viewer. The Earth almost filled the entire screen. 'I'm sorry, there's too little time,' the doctor murmured. 'Any moment now the freighter will enter Earth's atmosphere. Nothing can stop it now.' And yes, I am no longer going to attempt Tegan's Australian accent by popular demand. People are telling me, please just stop. Now, in retrospect, you can see from the TV scripts why Saward ended up writing a sixth Doctor who was temperamentally the polar opposite of the fifth. Davison's Doctor is helpless in this violent world, more so in the book than even on television, quite unlike Colin Baker's Doctor in Saward's next Cyberman script, Season 22's Attack of the Cybermen. That story would not feature a Doctor internally conflicted about violence. But I keep talking about Eric Saward on an Ian Marter episode. Sorry, gotta stop doing that. Marter finds the Cybermen fascinating. The TV script didn't do much with the notion of Cybermen as decayed humanoids kept alive through the art of cybernetics. Saward refers to them as robots several times, and Marter uses the word automatons a lot. However, Marter does refer to them as having weirdly hypnotic iPods, one of many times that Marter uses the words weird, bizarre, or strange to describe the action. That's a lot like Terrence, though. Terrence favored words like weird, strange, savage, gleaming. Marter's main literary technique is using the language of the five senses to set the scene, something the other novelizations don't often do. Marter revels in describing smells and sounds that could not be realized on TV. Laser pistols were. The Cybermen constantly emit mechanical noises, whether moving, thinking, or just standing still. Quote, "The cyber leader moved closer, and the doctor could not help recoiling slightly from the sweet oily vapor that came from the ventilator grill." One of many instances in the novelization where characters are nauseated by how the Cybermen smell. I'd be lying if I didn't say that Earthshock the novelization can be a chore to read at times. The level of detail is immersive, but Marter's universe is violent, much like the South Bronx of the late 1970s. Too loud, smells awful. It's an exhilarating book in short bursts, but many of his character descriptions are unflattering. Matthew Waterhouse, in his autobiography, took issue with Marter's portrayal of Adric's final scene. One funny side note comes at the end, though, as Tegan is, quote, "more concerned with the fate of Adric than the history of the dinosaurs." Again, that is not how Janet Fielding played the bit on TV. Not even in the slightest. There's a lot of other aspects to Earthshock that bear discussion. We have not talked during this review so much about Captain Briggs and how she is portrayed on television by Beryl Reid, who I always hold gives a very underrated and unfortunately overlooked performance. We have not talked much about the overly long TARDIS fight scenes, and we have not talked about some of the plot holes that are lovingly described in the Discontinuity Guide. I am a very big fan of Earthshock on TV. I got genuinely emotional when I came across this story again in my Twitter pilgrimage in 2021 when Adric died. I was surprised by how upset I was watching the entire series in sequence up to that point. I think Earthshock on TV works really well, and you'll notice that I have not played a lot of audio clips from Earthshock the TV story during this essay, since I am describing the Marter novelization, which is at times at great variance to the TV. But there are two clips from television that I want to play now, and then I'll briefly discuss them in terms of how they come across in the novelization.
Take that straight to my cabin.
Captain, welcome aboard, ma'am.
Don't call me Ma'am on the bridge.
Sorry, Captain.
And get that transponder code fed into the navigational computer at once. I want to get underway.
Yes, Captain.
7 hours they kept me waiting. 7 hours! I'm exhausted.
Were there problems with security?
Earth's on red alert. Some interstellar conference. That's why they're checking that bit more carefully.
Explains why we were scanned half a dozen times.
Well, there'll be no more problems from now on. I've got a clearance straight through to Earth. Our bonus is safe.
There was no mention of the missing crew members.
Mr. Ringway was concerned that might be the reason for you being delayed.
Oh, panicking again, was he? No mention, Mr. Ringway.
I just happened to think that the disappearance of 3 crew members rather important, that's all.
So do I, mister. But it's something that can be settled when we get back to Earth and our cargo's delivered safely, understood? Make ready to get underway. If it makes you any happier, double the patrols. I don't want any mention of this. You're beginning to bore me. Bearing in mind that as a tween in the United States when I first saw Earthshock, I would not have had the foggiest idea who Beryl Reid was. About a year later, my aunt went to London on a summer vacation and brought back presents for her niece and nephew. I was given a copy of The Nine Tailors by Dorothy L. Sayers, and my sister was given a hardcover children's book with Beryl Reid's picture on the cover. I assume that it was pegged to the Get Up and Go TV series, but I am not able to find it in an online search now. Although, side note, Beryl Reid's autobiography is called Roll Out the Barrel, which, hilarious. The point is, I thought that Reid gave a terrific performance on television, and I may be in the minority on that, although I have heard some very spirited defenses of her being cast in this story. Looking at the novelization, Marter describes her in basically the same way that Beryl Reid acts. These are excerpts from pages 58 through 60, which is the print adaptation of the scene that we've just heard. A short but fierce-looking woman with elegantly styled coppery hair, piercingly alert eyes, a brittle, haughty voice. "Don't call me ma'am on the bridge," the captain snapped. She dropped heavily into her command seat and shut her eyes. She complained. She replied sarcastically. "Our bonus is safe," she said with a glacial smile. "Panicking again, were we, Mr. Ringway?" The captain laughed, swaggering across the bridge. On page 60, the captain retorts sharply, adds contemptuously, "This is a very crisp performance, and if Marter is adapting Eric Sayward's stage directions for what performance he wants out of the actor playing Captain Briggs, I would say that Beryl Reid hit those notes with 1,000% accuracy."
Now I'll never know if I was right.
Look out!
I must save Adric!
Look!
Adric!
Adric? Doctor!
We've already seen the aftermath of Adric's death in the books. It was covered in the Time Flight novelization, which came out first. We talked about that on episode 74 of this podcast. This is the first time that a writer has to describe the death of a companion in a Target novelization in publication order, with the adaptation of the Dalek's Master Plan not coming out for several more years after this. Marter, surprisingly, underwrites the scene. Page 128. No one spoke, as the Doctor and his two companions watched the glorious patterns of the heavens gradually reappear on the viewer, shimmering silently in the infinite emptiness. After a while, the Doctor went over to the wreckage of the Cyber Deputy and dislodged what was left of the metal star from the ventilator grill. He stared at it in the palm of his hand for a moment. All the gold edging had vanished. With a sad smile, he dropped it into his pocket and turned resignedly towards the console. Very different from how it's played on television. When I was young and I bought this book for the first time, I thought the quote, sad smile expression was not really the right way for the Doctor to express grief over Adric's death. But again, considering the graphic violence and all the sometimes over-the-top language used to describe smells and sights and gouts of blood and horrifically dead crewmen, this is probably the best way to end the novelization, on a quieter, more reflective note. Next time on Doctor Who Literature, continuing on with our Peter Davison mini-season, we are in our 4th of 10 episodes describing 10 Peter Davison novelizations that came out consecutively. We are dipping ahead to the first of the season 20 novelizations, and there will be 4 of those in a row. We are going to perhaps one of the least loved stories of season 20. It is the middle story of the Black Guardian trilogy, and it is a story that has its fair share of detractors in terms of its direction and acting. But the novelization is going to be the longest Target book that we've seen in nearly a decade. It is 155 pages of text, and it is written by a true sci-fi author who is going to go deep inside his own TV scripts and write a work of hard science fiction that is perhaps one of the most underrated Target novelizations there is. Next week, a returning guest, Stephen Alexander from the Robots in Our Eyes podcast, will be joining me as we discuss Doctor Who, Terminus, by Stephen Gallagher, writing as John Lydegger. Thank you for joining me on another episode of the Doctor Who Literature podcast. This podcast is produced by David Barsky, Jim Sangster, and yours truly. This week's episode was written and edited by me. Our logo was designed by Jim Sangster. Special thanks to my special guest, Jon Arnold. This podcast can be found on most of your podcast apps of choice. You can find all past episodes at podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/Doctor Who Lit. It really helps if you rate 5 stars and subscribe. You can find me on Twitter at Doctor Who Novels, that's Dr. Who Novels, and on email at Doctor Who Literature, that's drwholiterature@gmail.com. Please drop me a line with your comments, questions, and suggestions. Thank you for listening, and whatever you do, keep turning the pages.
Direction point! Direction point!
A Doctor Who podcast network.